No one in Sepang expected the silence that fell across the paddock when the Yamaha prototype rolled out of pit lane. A test meant to be private suddenly felt enormous. Because in a single lap, Toprak Razgatlioglu did something even Yamaha's own engineers didn't predict, something that would force them to rethink the entire direction of their MotoGP future. And the truth is, this wasn't just another test day. It was the moment Yamaha's V4 project stopped being an experiment and became a threat. What unfolded next left technicians stunned, rivals anxious, and insiders whispering that MotoGP's balance of power might be shifting faster than anyone thought. The paddock had expected a quiet morning, a routine continuation of Yamaha's hidden V4 program. Only a select group of engineers even knew the engine was ready for its next phase. For months, Yamaha had been fighting to recover from seasons of stagnation, seasons defined by declining straight-line speed, inconsistent corner exits, and a philosophy that had grown too conservative for modern MotoGP. So when rumors began circulating that Toprak, a rider who doesn't even come from Yamaha's MotoGP squad, had been flown in overnight, everything changed. Whispers traveled fast. Why him? Why now? What is Yamaha planning? Toprak wasn't supposed to be here. Not yet. Not on the prototype V4 that was still unstable, unpredictable, and theoretically months away from aggressive testing. But the moment he appeared in his leathers, eyes locked on the machine waiting under the fluorescent garage lights, it became clear this was no ordinary day. Yamaha hadn't just invited a rider, they had invited a weapon. And when the bike finally rolled toward pit exit, the sense of anticipation was almost crushing. None of them knew that within minutes, the entire test plan would be rewritten. The prototype's first ignition echoed differently, deeper, smoother, more controlled than the day before. Observers watching from behind barriers exchanged glances. The tone was unmistakable. Something inside that engine had been changed. According to insiders, Yamaha had quietly revised firing order logic, adjusted torque delivery maps, and introduced a more flexible exhaust configuration. The goal was simple: stability and calmness under strain, two things their old struggled with. But nobody expected Toprak to trust it instantly. Most riders begin cautiously when testing a prototype. Toprak did the opposite. Before the engineers had even settled in front of their monitors, he was already pushing the bike deep into the braking zone of turn 1. The rear tire squirmed. The front compressed harder than Yamaha predicted. Yet the bike didn't flinch. A second later, the first jaw-dropping reading appeared on the timing screen. Top speed, higher than Yamaha's baseline from the previous test. One engineer reportedly checked the sensor line twice to make sure it wasn't malfunctioning. And then he went even faster. The V4 had awakened, and so had something inside the rider who was meant to tame it. But this was only the beginning of the surprises Yamaha was about to face. The next laps turned confusion into disbelief. Every model, every simulation, every expectation Yamaha had built for months assumed that riders would brake progressively, that they would need time to earn the bike's trust. Toprak ignored all of that. He began braking at depths that their calculations simply hadn't accounted for. In corners where test riders eased in cautiously, he threw the bike at the apex with almost reckless confidence, only to stabilize it at the last possible moment. Telemetry later showed braking force spikes that exceeded Yamaha's projected values by a margin large enough to trigger internal warnings. Some mechanics watching trackside reportedly muttered that it didn't make sense. The bike shouldn't have been able to absorb that load. But somehow it did. Observers noticed something else. The new aerodynamic package, with its layered winglets and stepped panels, was generating a level of downforce consistency Yamaha hadn't achieved since the early M1 era. The engineers, still analyzing the unbelievable braking density, barely had time to reset when another shock appeared. Toprak was matching the lean angles of MotoGP veterans on a bike he had ridden for minutes, not months. But the turning point of the morning wasn't the braking. It was a silhouette stepping quietly into Yamaha's garage. And that single arrival ignited the paddock into a frenzy. A wave of noise rippled through the corridor when a figure wearing a jacket with faint red stitching stepped into the Yamaha garage. A former Ducati technician, someone who had contributed to the very machinery dominating MotoGP, was now analyzing Yamaha data over the shoulders of Japanese engineers. This was almost unheard of. Yamaha, the most traditional factory on the grid, rarely brought in outside philosophies, especially from their hardest rival. Yet here he was, reviewing corner exit stability graphs and ride height behavior as if already part of the team. His interest centered on the moment the bike picked up grip after braking, a weakness that had plagued Yamaha for years. According to rumors, he immediately recognized traits familiar from Ducati's own evolution. The subtle anti-wheelie gains, the aerodynamic loading, the torque modulation logic. What shocked insiders wasn't that Yamaha had hired him. It was that Yamaha was now willing to change, aggressively, openly, and unapologetically. This wasn't the Yamaha of old. But the biggest surprise wasn't even his presence. Because someone else in the garage was watching everything quietly, calculating. And his reaction would lead to a new layer of tension inside the team. While Toprak pushed the prototype to its limits, Fabio Quartararo stood behind a monitor, arms crossed, studying every line of telemetry. No outbursts. No complaints. Just silence, the kind that signals deep concern. Fabio had spent seasons fighting with a bike that wouldn't accelerate, wouldn't stabilize under wheelie control, and wouldn't support his smoother riding style. Now, another rider was shaping the future of the Yamaha he depended on. And Toprak's feedback was radically different. Toprak wanted more downforce. Fabio preferred less drag. Toprak thrived on violent braking. Fabio needed corner flow. Two riders, two philosophies, one factory trying to rebuild. Insiders suggested that Fabio quietly pointed out behaviors in Toprak's data that didn't match his own needs. Not confrontational, but firm. He knew development direction decides championships. And Yamaha was suddenly being pulled by two gravitational forces. Still as confused as the garage became, another shock was forming, one that didn't involve riding style at all. Because the stopwatch was about to show something nobody expected. Something borderline unbelievable. The garage went silent as Toprak began his next run. Lap after lap, the sectors flashed green. Mechanics leaned closer. Engineers froze mid-conversation. The Ducati technician tilted his head as if he'd misread the digital feed. Then the full lap time appeared. 4/10 faster than his best time from day one. On a prototype. In incomplete aero. With experimental electronics. But there was something even more staggering. He had just beaten Yamaha's predicted simulation time for next season. Not in theory. Not in a model. On the track. One insider later described the moment. Two senior engineers looked at each other like the numbers were wrong. They reloaded the data 3 times. They couldn't believe it. Even more shocking was how he achieved it. He braked deeper than simulations allowed. He carried lean angles higher than expected for this chassis stage. He stabilized the rear grip in a way Yamaha hadn't managed for years. Something had changed. Something fundamental. and Yamaha's belief in their timeline changed with it. But the biggest twist didn't come from the lap time. It came from a moment that happened almost by accident, and it would alter the course of Yamaha's V4 project entirely. During a late run, Toprak entered a corner too aggressively, and the bike snapped sideways. It wasn't intentional, not at first. But instead of recovering cautiously, he held the slide, stabilizing the machine with throttle control only he possesses. In that moment, the engineers watching the aero load data witnessed something unexpected. The aero version A and version B had complementary strengths Yamaha never realized could work together. Version A delivered monster braking stability. Version B improved top speed efficiency. Yet during that slide, the transitional airflow created a hybrid behavior neither package was designed to produce. Toprak instinctively felt it. The bike gripped harder on exit. The wheelie effect dropped. Acceleration sharpened. When he returned to the garage, he removed his helmet, looked at the engineers, and said something so simple, yet so impactful that it froze the room. It wants both. And suddenly, everything made sense. A hybrid aero, custom-tuned to Toprak's extreme style. Unexpectedly compatible with Fabio's cornering needs. Within minutes, Yamaha's senior staff began redrafting the next phase of development. This was the twist that no simulator, no engineer, no planning session had predicted. But the final impact of this day was still to come. The sun was setting when Yamaha finalized their internal report. The data was clear. The progress was undeniable. And the verdict was unanimous. This was the most important test in Yamaha's modern MotoGP history. The V4 wasn't just viable. It was evolving faster than expected. Toprak's instinct had unlocked aerodynamic potential Yamaha didn't know existed. Fabio's analysis refined the direction, ensuring the bike wouldn't drift into a single-rider design. The ex-Ducati technician confirmed that Yamaha's trajectory was finally aligning with the demands of modern MotoGP. For the first time in years, Yamaha's garage felt something it hadn't felt in a long time. Momentum. The paddock, sensing the shift, began circulating a new sentence that summed up the magnitude of the moment. Toprak did something even Yamaha couldn't predict. Because in a single test session, he didn't just ride the prototype V4. He transformed it. He reshaped the project. He accelerated the future. And now, everyone is asking the same question. If this is what he can do with a prototype, what happens when the full factory version finally arrives?